Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, good evening. It is 6 p.m. on January 19th. We are going to start our meeting by calling roll. Claudia, can you please call roll for us?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Armstrong Romero,
Here.
Director Cox,
Present.
Director Gerken,
Here.
Director Ivy,
Present.
Director Mason,
Here.
Director Ortiz,
Present.
Director Reinhardt.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. This evening, welcome. Happy New Year, everyone. Really glad to be here with you all this evening. And we have a very full agenda, so we are going to jump right to it. This meeting tonight is held virtually. However, our future school board meetings may be held in person. That's something that we will discuss this evening. So in order to meet social distancing and other public health guidelines, we will continue to stream online, even if we go back to meeting in person. So anyone who is interested in addressing the board, please feel free to sign up with Claudia by 4:30 p.m. the Monday prior to our meetings. We are meeting the third Tuesday of every month. We may have special meetings that will be posted at least 24 to 72 hours in advance. And you can email Claudia at cpass@aurora-k12.org if you'd like to speak to the board. You can also email Claudia, and she is amazing with forwarding all correspondence to the board. So with that being said, we will move on to opportunity for audience. This evening, we have quite a few speakers. We have 10 speakers. We're going to start off with Paula Cuevas. And the topic is equity for all students. Paula, welcome. Please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes to speak to the board.
Hello, my name is Paula Cuevas, and thank you for your time to hear my thoughts today. I'm a resident of Aurora, and I live across the street from Aurora Central High School and near Peoria Elementary. I'm also a parent and a teacher in DPS, although I've worked in APS at Paris Elementary. I've heard that Peoria and Aurora Central will be closing and turned into magnet schools. I have some questions for you all to think about as you create these new schools, and I'll email them to you afterwards. I really hope that they are considered. Who are these schools meant to serve? How can we make sure all children in the neighborhood have access to these new schools? Will community members be invited to help create the vision of these schools? And what is the reason for closing Peoria and Central and opening art magnet schools in their place? Is it rebranding for higher enrollment, low test scores, or something else? This needs to be purposeful, and that intention needs to be communicated with the community. We deserve to know why our schools are closing. And what are the unintended consequences for the neighborhood after opening these magnet schools? Will this contribute to the current and future gentrification of my neighborhood, forcing low-income families out, further adding to the segregation of existing surrounding neighborhoods, like the one directly north of Peoria near Colfax? Many inequities exist in our educational system because of racist policies and practices, like high-stakes testing, policing in schools, and local property tax funding, just to name a few. How can we create a truly wonderful neighborhood school that serves the children in its vicinity? Will you actively seek new administration and teachers who mirror the high Latinx population and who have knowledge of anti-racism in education? I'm an educator, a parent, and an activist who dreams of education that serves all children and not just wealthy white children, which historically magnet schools are known to serve. The children in my neighborhood, including my own, deserve to attend a school with many resources and high quality curriculum that give them knowledge and opportunities in and outside of the classroom. Equity needs to be at the core of education. And I'd love to continue this conversation and be a part of recreating the schools and education in my neighborhood if there are any opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula.
Thank you.
And we look forward to reading your questions that you emailed to Claudia. Thanks.
That sounds good.
All right, the next speaker that we have is Margaret Moore. The topic is attendance for remote learning. Margaret, welcome. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak to the board.
And my name is Margaret Moore. I also go by Megan Moore in the district as well. Dear Superintendent Munn and Board of Directors, I'm writing on behalf of our speaking on behalf of our attendance policy for remote learners. I am strictly talking about the families who have chosen for their child to stay in the remote setting. This is a choice being offered by APS during this pandemic, and these families have made the choice to stay in this setting, which I respect. However, I wholeheartedly believe the attendance policy needs to change for these students. Currently, we are to mark students present if we see them online at all. This could mean they showed up for 5 minutes in a synchronous class, or they were on a program such as Lexia, but that does not mean they have attended one full lesson or completed any of the classwork for the day. This policy is allowing for hours of learning lost. Having such inconsistency is also a problem each day when we are trying to build off the day before. Presently, our attendance numbers are not accurate, and in my opinion, is giving the wrong message to families. It is saying to families that remote learning is not as important, and it does not matter if you are in attendance most of the day. It also says to the teachers that have been assigned to a remote classroom that your job is not as important or should not be taken as seriously. This policy is also unfair to the students that attend all day, every day. According to our website, we would not accept this attendance. Our website states that it is a state law for school districts to monitor attendance for all students and report those who have a significant number of unexcused absences. It also states that we have the duty to bring appropriate cases to truancy to court to enforce this law. With our current remote attendance policy, we are not accurately tracking absences. We are allowing students to miss a majority of our instruction, but because we saw them online at some point in the day, they are present. I believe families of remote students should be held accountable and to the same expectations as families that have chosen for their students to be in the classroom. If a student is absent from the classroom, parents need to call the front office and give the reason. The same thing should apply for remote students. Regardless of the learning environment, the expectations for attendance should be the same. I understand why we needed to adjust the policy last spring in the first quarter. I believe now is the time we need to go back to the values APS holds regarding regular attendance that will allow for the high rigor of learning. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening.
Thank you so much. Right, next we have Molly. And Molly, I am not going to butcher your last name, so please state your name correctly for the record. And you have 3 minutes to address the board.
Thank you. My name is Molly Dockauer, and I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for what you do. All of the difficult decisions that have landed on your laps and the way that this board has demonstrated grace and reflection in making those decisions is inspiring. I'm here to talk to you tonight about Peoria Elementary School. I want to tell you the story of how this school became my home in order to convince you to pause your decision tonight on the blueprint plan, which will outright dismantle Peoria in order to create a new magnet school. This is going to be my 12th year in the classroom, and I've spent 11 of those years in APS. The 1 year I spent outside of the district opened up my eyes to what a gem Peoria really is. In 2018, I decided to move back to my hometown of Buffalo because go Bills, and I assumed that it would be easy to find a school that mirrored the one I was leaving, a school like Peoria. I assumed that it would be easy to find a district that mirrored the one I was leaving, a district like APS. I was wrong. In the year I spent back on the East Coast, it was easy to reflect on the strengths of the environment that I left, and I quickly returned. I call Peoria a gem of Aurora because when I step foot within its walls, it feels like anything is possible. I became a teacher to make the world a better place by shaping our next generation. It takes an entire team around you to achieve such lofty goals, and I didn't realize just how much support I was getting from Peoria until I left. As a teacher, you can experience burnout and exhaustion when you feel like your efforts aren't yielding results or the team around you doesn't have a shared vision. Peoria is an efficient machine when it comes to churning out ideas that spark motivation and innovation. This mindset helped it put into place things like a focus on social emotional learning, intramural sports, adapted ELD curriculum, 3D printing projects, gifted and talented programs, ecology clubs, yoga clubs, parenting classes, and so much more. I've never experienced burnout at Peoria because this school has an environment that zaps any I can't do it attitudes with its teamwork, its honest relationships with coaches, and a general optimism about the challenging work that we do every day. I could continue to list ways that Peoria has helped me become a teacher I can feel proud of, but it wasn't just Peoria that I missed when I left. One of the biggest gaps between my year in Buffalo and the time I taught in Aurora was the support of this district. I've always felt heard as a professional by the members of this board, and that is something that I recognize as valuable. It's kind of funny because when I left Buffalo, a colleague of mine gave me this mug that said, "What if?" And she handed it to me with a sad look in her face on my last day and said, maybe you were just too big a dreamer for Buffalo schools. And that year when I arrived back to APS, what if was the motto that Superintendent Munn chose to launch our year. And I knew that I was home again. It's my hope that this district will continue to prove that it listens to its community by today pausing its decision on the blueprint plan so that a better solution can be found. Because what if we were able to come up with something better? Or we could look at this year's motto, find a way or make one. We know that a demand for magnet schools is strong, and we can find a way to make Peoria that magnet school, but let us make it in a way that also recognizes the solid foundation that we have already built. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your decision.
Thank you so much, Molly. Next, we have Alicia Leclerc, and you will also be speaking about Peoria closure. You again have 3 minutes to address the board, and please state your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Alicia Leclerc, and I'm the Director of School Programs at Glow Mundo. It's an education nonprofit that works to strengthen social emotional learning, teacher wellness, trauma-informed instruction, and equity in school communities. And we've served Title I schools across the Denver metro area for over a decade. And after 2 years of collaboration with Peoria, we can say with great sincerity that Peoria markedly stands out from other schools that we've worked with. This is a school that in my deepest of hearts, I hope would be lifted up with pride within the district and not closed. As you well know, underfunded schools serving highly impacted communities face an overwhelming number of challenges that aren't present in more homogeneous white, middle, or upper class schools. And because of this, there are so many Title I schools simply in survival mode. We see it time and time again, and I've personally taught in one of those schools as well. Simultaneously, we also know that when done well, these spaces can be the richest and most meaningful schools that we have. They can act as a stabilizing force and a refuge for our communities that are not often offered supports or privileges by other systems in our society. And Peoria is one of the special and unique Title I schools that truly does just that. They are authentically thriving. This immensely skilled leadership team has painstakingly crafted a culture and a teaching staff that is stabilizing, that is nurturing, and that is rigorous for their local community. And when I walk through the halls at Peoria, the sense of kindness and community is palpable. When I watch how the school responds to a struggling student acting out, the first thing I notice is how calm and compassionate the staff are in response. When I saw a new parent arrive at school, clearly scarred by experiences at many other schools that her and her student had been to, I got to watch in awe as teachers worked tirelessly to earn her trust and bring her into the fold. And she's now a leader in our parent community. And when I sit with a group of teachers unpacking sensitive and painful equity issues, I'm struck by the way that they check their egos and their defensiveness at the door and engage with honest reflection and openness. After a recent equity team meeting, my colleague and mentor, Dr. Vivian Elliott, who was the first principal of color in Jefferson County schools and has been doing equity work nationally for the last 30 years, reflected that she would unquestionably send her own children to this school. So Glow Mundo's work at Peoria has not been about helping them to find stability as it's been in so many other schools, but to build upon the solid foundation that they've already established. They are what a Title I school should look like. So I hope that, I know this is a complicated situation, and I also know that closing such an extraordinary asset to this community and the district at large is probably not the answer to this solution, to the situation. So I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you so much, Alicia. The next speaker we have is Myra Perez. Myra will also be speaking to the board about Peoria. Myra, you have 3 minutes to address the board. Please state your name for the record and welcome.
Hi, my name is Myra Perez. Today I am talking to you about the closing of Peoria. I am speaking to you as both a parent and a paraeducator at Peoria Elementary. Peoria is an extraordinarily unique school that deserves to stay open and be celebrated, not closed. Before coming to Peoria, my children were at a school in Commerce City. I heard about Peoria through family and friends, and its amazing reputation made me both transfer my kids there through the open enrollment process and seek a job there as well. People told me about how many resources there are for families, and not just academic resources, but resources for life like housing, food, and bill pay assistance. I heard that every single grade level had high quality teachers who were skilled and cared deeply for their kids, and that this was a place for where my children could grow in a lot of ways. I heard there was before and after school program with yoga and games and art that teachers volunteered to run to get that extra connection in with their students. This is the fourth school my kids have been to, and it's the one that we were never planning on leaving. None of the other schools we've attended has provided the resources that Peoria provides. None of them have the same quality of teachers. I know how fortunate we are to be here and how good we have it here. 10% of Peoria families like mine move here for a healthy, safe, and supportive environment that's not necessarily available in other places. After I got approved for DACA, Peoria employed me as a paraeducator. When you walk into Peoria, you feel good. You're treated equally in this building. You're not treated like you're just a para. They make you feel like you're awesome. My colleagues and administrators motivate me to continue my education and grow my career. They encourage me to get a licensure to teach ELD, and they are my support system in bettering myself. I know that the school is not just an invaluable support system for me and my family, but for so many other families in our community as well in their efforts to better their lives. Closing the school would be devastating for so many people who've come to count on the stability and support that Peoria provides. Sadly, this pending closure sends the message to Peoria's community that our kids don't matter, that we're invisible, and that we're not going to be heard. I was hesitant to talk today because I don't know if my voice counts. I decided to do it anyways, and I hope it does count. I hope people are listening and prioritizing what really matters, and I hope that you reconsider closing down Peoria for the sake of our community and the district. Thank you for your time.
Myra, your voice does count, and thank you so much for speaking to the board tonight. Obviously, these decisions are tough, and it may feel like, however, whichever way the board goes, that you weren't heard, but you were definitely heard, and thank you. The next speaker we have is Guillermina Aguilar, and Guillermina will also be speaking about the Peoria closure. And Guillermina, please state your name for the record. If I butchered it, my apologies. You have 3 minutes to address the board, and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Guillermina Aguilar, and I'm the family liaison at Peoria Elementary. I chose to speak today because I think it's important that you understand what an extraordinary school and community Peoria is, how extremely valuable it should be to our district, and how devastating it would be to outright close it. Peoria is a gem of a school in our district, and it should be held up as an example, not closed. We work tirelessly to provide an amount of support and resources to our families that is unparalleled by other schools. And as a result, we have earned the wholehearted confidence, trust, and engagement of our families. The new Blueprint APS plan reports that our community wants each school to provide wraparound services for families. Peoria is already doing that to the extreme. We hold our families' hand in every step of the way to ensure that they get the knowledge, access, and resources they need. In the beginning of the year checking process, we spend enormous amount of time sitting down with families to ensure that each parent understands and knows how to access technology, platforms, and navigate systems. And we don't just hand them paperwork, but we work with them as a team to fill them out. As a result, Peoria has had 100% of our families submit a free and reduced lunch applications for the last 2 years, something no other school in APS has done. Our families reach out to me daily, not just for school support, but to get information on housing opportunities, rent and bill pay assistance, food support, general financial support, furniture, clothing. I could go on. Peoria has taken it upon ourselves to reach out and form partnerships with community organizations so we can actually provide those supports. We currently partner with King Soopers, the Salvation Army, Clothes for Kids, AMP the Cause, Operation School Bell, and many more. I have parents who feel so concerned that Peoria so connected to Peoria that they will still reach out to me for support even after their child graduates. And we happily provide it. We had 85% of our families participate in parent-teacher conferences this fall and have 45 active year-round volunteers. The relationships we have built with our families should be celebrated. When it was announced that Peoria might be closed, our families were in a state of shock. They had no idea this was coming, which speaks to the fact that their opinions and voices were not authentically or equitably included in the decision-making process. They were devastated. And when I asked some of my more vocal parents to speak today, due to this announcement and previous experiences in our education system, their reactions were, what's the point? What difference will it make? They won't even listen to us anyways. Closing Peoria would strip vulnerable families of an extraordinary wealth of resources and support, and it would reinforce to them that their voices do not matter to the district, that their kids do not matter, that the community does not matter. We need to build on this extraordinary school and community, not shut it down. I urge you to reconsider this closure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. The next speaker we have is Leah Larson. Leah will also be speaking about the repurposing of Peoria. Leah, please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak to the board, and welcome.
Hi, my name is Leah Larson, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I am a teacher at Peoria. I now welcome you to close your eyes as I take you on a quick visualization tour of Peoria. Upon entering Peoria, you are greeted by our office staff with a warm smile. You might even see a child reading to one of these caring women. As you glance into our nurse's office, you might see a crying child being comforted or a parent getting the information they need in order to support their child's well-being. Next, you'll say hello to Lisa Toner, the leader you need in every school building. She knows great instruction and treats her teachers as professionals. She also knows how important it is to empower her staff to take care of themselves so that they can be at their best for their students. Teaming with Carla Fott, our vice principal, they have developed a staff that is inspired every day. After that, you pass by our family liaison, Guillermina Aguilar. She will be busily distributing food for kids in need, supporting a student, or working with a parent. She is the glue that binds home and school and goes above and beyond with a smile on her face. As you peek into a classroom, you will only catch a glimpse of the magic that happens as teachers harness their students' energy and passion. You may see a skilled teacher creating space for students to engage in habits of mind and interaction, challenging their learning from our partnership with the Teacher Development Group. You will see a student decide to go to the classroom reflection station where they will move through our GLOW formula, helping them get back to a state of calm in order to access learning. You will see teachers able to remain in a state of calm, cultivating a loving, kind environment because they know trauma-responsive teaching due to our partnership with GLOW Mundo. You might glance into a window to see a teacher engaging in professional development of many kinds through coaching with our math, literacy, or GLOW Mundo coaches. You might even see this teacher engaging in brave conversations with our transforming safety team, increasing their sense of responsibility for equitable teaching and learning. I am a parent, and I can tell you we don't want a fancy magnet school label. We want the community I just described to you. After touring many DPS schools, I chose to open enroll my child at Peoria from kindergarten through 5th grade and hope to open enroll my son in the coming years. My daughter received an incredible education where she was challenged to rise above her potential, and she continues to perform at advanced levels in a DPS middle school. When I asked her what she thought about the changes being presented to Peoria, she said, "My friends and I have always planned to come back and volunteer. If Peoria is gone, friendships will be lost and relationships between teachers and students will be lost." I've been teaching for nearly 16 years, all of which have been in APS, 9 at Paris and 7 at Peoria. I've developed many relationships with colleagues throughout the district, and I can guarantee you that there is not another Peoria. What we have in our community is incredibly special and rare, and if you've ever had the pleasure of visiting our community, you know it from the moment you walk through our front doors. So I ask you today, do not tear apart the heartbeat of a community, but rather work alongside us to do what's right for our students and their families. Take care and be well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. Really appreciated that visualization activity. Thank you. All right, next we have Donna Pickett. Donna, please state your name for the record. Welcome. and the topic is teaching in person.
My name is Donna Pickett. Thank you and good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I am speaking to you as an individual, not as a union board member. As you know, teachers and students have returned to in-person learning this week. This, in my opinion, is not in the best interest of our students or our teachers. Teachers want to be back in the classroom just as much, if not more so, than do students, but not at the risk of our own lives or their families' lives. I know that Superintendent Munn, Governor Paulus, Dr. Davis with Tri-County Health, and experts from CDC say that teachers are identified as essential workers. It seems to me that truly essential workers would not have been pushed back on the list for the vaccine. Kaiser Permanente has advised me that it appears that I will not be getting the first vaccine until mid to late March. Incorporating the need for a second dose and a wait time to build up immunity after the vaccines are completed, this means many, if not most teachers, will not reasonably be safe to return to in-person instruction until the school year ends. According to a CNN report yesterday, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former Food and Drug Administration Commissioner, said in a recent interview, "We could have persistently high levels of infection into the spring until we get enough people vaccinated." With that being said, and the district administration's laudable goal of providing some in-person learning for our APS students, I once more respectfully request Superintendent Munn and the Board of Education to permit teachers to go home or stay at their homes during times they are not actively conducting in-person instruction. This would serve to minimize risks of unnecessary exposure for teachers. I feel we are once again unnecessarily putting teachers at risk by requiring them to report to their buildings and to remain there during times they are not actively engaged in in-person learning with their students. Sitting in a classroom without students accomplishes nothing while presenting unreasonable exposure to infection risk. I must ask again, as I did the last time I had the privilege of speaking before the board, what do we gain by requiring this of teachers? Because risk versus gain must always be a consideration in these matters. Teachers need to be given the respect and the professional courtesy to be permitted to teach remotely from their homes unless they are actively conducting an in-person class. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Donna. Last but not least, we have Leticia Lucero. The topic is pending Peoria repurposing. Leticia, please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to address the board, and welcome.
Oh, hello, my name is Leticia Lucero. I am a 4th grade teacher at Peoria Elementary. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you today. I speak to you today as a teacher, a mother, and a community member. I have lived in this neighborhood for over a decade, and I have come to love this neighborhood. It's home, it's my community. I have been able to be here and be involved in the school community. I've worked in a few different schools here, and I can honestly say as a teacher that Peoria has been the most amazing experience I've had as an educator. And I've only been here since August. I've actively tried to come to Peoria for years because I've heard wonderful things about the administration, the other teachers, and I can say that it has all lived up to the hype. I have felt like I've grown more as a teacher and an educator in these few months than I have had in my career as a teacher. The administration, Lisa and Carla, have worked tirelessly to support us as educators and give us everything we need to support our families. I have seen so many things out of this school. As a community member, I am in awe of all of the services that we provide. We talk about every student shaping a successful future, and it's my belief that that comes from a community that supports its family, that can then in turn take the time to support their students as learners. Peoria provides all of these resources to our families and the communities, and it makes a huge difference. I can say that I have seen so much, and it makes me really wonder as a community member, what will happen to the community and the students and the families when we take those supports away. Closing, I recently found out that 6th Avenue will be also taken in consideration to close. And that is 2 of our neighborhood schools. And I'm just wondering if we can take a pause and postpone this decision to think about how we can supplement and add to the successes that Peoria already has, and see if we can find a way to add on to the school that we already have. I just wonder about all of these students who are being displaced and having to go to different areas, and what will happen without the community support, without all of the things that we have. And here I was thinking that 3 minutes, how would I fill that? But I wanted to take the time to say, as a mom and a community member, that it would be devastating to lose this school. I was so happy when I got to bring my son to the school, and I've seen him grow in just a few months of remote learning, and it just blows me away. So I would just like you to take the time to pause and postpone the decision to see what we can do to come together as a community and to really have the community members be engaged, because I honestly don't feel like their voice was truly heard. I do thank you for your time, and I hope you take all of these things into consideration.
Thank you so much, Leticia.
Thank you.
All right, so we had one member, Marilyn Sterrett, of the Opportunity for Audience. Her topic was a request to reopen schools. She has not shown up. So again, we have 10 slots for Opportunity for Audience in this virtual time frame. So just if you have any, if you didn't get to sign up tonight and you wanted to speak, please feel free to send your comments to Claudia, and those comments will make it to the board. Again, thank you to the 9 members who did show up and spoke very passionately to the board this evening. We appreciate hearing from you, and all of your voices are definitely heard. Thank you. With that being said, we will now move on to the consent agenda. We have 8 items on the consent agenda this evening. At this time, I will entertain a motion.
This is Debbie. I'll move the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I've seen from these Republicans, they already seem to be making noises.
Kevin Cox.
Well, maybe it's unconstitutional.
Kevin, I think you're okay. All right, so we have a first and a second by Director Gerken and Vice President Cox. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none. Claudia, can you please call roll?
Dr. Armstrong Romero.
Aye.
Director Cox.
Aye.
Director Gerken.
Aye.
Director Ivy.
Aye.
Director Mason.
Aye.
Director Ortiz.
Aye.
Director Reinhardt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That will conclude our consent agenda. We are now into action items. The action item we have on board is the Blueprint APS discussion, and we received a request from Director Reinhardt to move the Blueprint APS item from the consent agenda to action. So at this time, I will open it up to the board if we'd like to start with a discussion. I don't believe there is no new information that we've received, so I didn't ask Superintendent Munn to prepare a presentation. However, district officials are on standby and are happy to answer any questions aside from those that have already been submitted. So, Director Reinhardt, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, President Armstrong Romero. I do have one question after the recommendation from the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee came out. And it's not a directive, it's a recommendation from them, and concerning, I guess, depleting the contingency fund to build the 2 recommended P8 schools as discussed in this phase of the blueprint plan. The recommendation mentions the possibility of utilizing COPs as opposed to depleting that contingency fund. I'm wondering if that has been given consideration, and the other part of my question around that is, as this recommendation also mentions, depleting the fund could lead to some other blueprint projects not being, to lose the ability to complete some other blueprint projects. What an example of that might be if the reallocation of funds were to go all to the 2 P8 buildings.
Thank you, Director Reinhardt, and let me ask Brett Johnson to join me as well. Certainly, we've considered the possibility of using COPs, and your approval of this would not take that off the table. It would still be something we could consider. The reason we're not leading with that, I think, is twofold. One, I think it's difficult to go to the taxpayers and take out a loan for something that we have money in the bank for. And so that's the last time we used a COP was for Mosley. And the reason we did it then was we needed the building and we didn't have any money to build it. And so we did a COP, and then we were able to pay it off with the passage of the next bond. In this circumstance, we have the dollars. And so that's I think, a more difficult conversation with the community, but we can certainly contemplate that if there's a clear alternative. Second, for bond dollars, we do have a window of time for which we are essentially supposed to use those dollars. And Brett, remind me what that window is.
Once we, the time clock starts when we borrow the money. So once the money is borrowed, generally the IRS wants us to spend it within 5 years.
So the bond was passed in 2016, and we borrowed it at different times during that time period, but we are certainly kind of nearing an extended period of time where we should be utilizing those dollars. And so we're leading with that, thinking that's the appropriate way to pay for these 2 buildings. But it doesn't take a COP off the table if in the next couple of months we identify an alternative need for those dollars.
Could you give an example of a project that has been mentioned in this phase that might not reach completion if the dollars are utilized for the 2 new buildings?
I don't know what the CBOC was specifically referring to. I mean, I can theorize something. So if the plan were to do a specialization around STEM, and we wanted to build out a number of science rooms in a particular building, we may not have the current bond dollars to do that. And I believe that's the kind of thing the CBOC was talking about, that if there are projects related to further implementation of Blueprint, those bond dollars may not be there. The challenge, of course, is we haven't identified those projects. And so It would just be banking dollars for the contingency, which is, this is a contingency fund, but for the possibility of something we haven't identified.
Thank you for that response, Superintendent Munn. I do have a few other concerns I'm just going to mention, and some of you have heard them previously in some of these discussions, and I'll just put them out there. And all the conversation we just heard during opportunity for audience pretty much sums up a good chunk of my concern around moving forward with Blueprint. Looking back through some of the town hall feedback and hearing these comments and hearing from some staff members, as we, the district, have put out that we've communicated, we've had town halls, we have. However, there's still this consistent voice that states they don't believe some don't believe they've been communicated with, they don't believe they've been part of the discussion. And that comes up a number of times. Another concern that comes up reviewing the feedback we've received is how the communities will have access to their own neighborhood schools if these neighborhood schools now require any sort of an application process. And I have talked about that too. To me, public schools are open to everyone. Neighborhood schools are open to their communities, and they don't require, this is my personal philosophy, a public school does not require an application process. Other barriers have been mentioned. Some of those, I believe, would be in communication language, not understanding the communication that's come out to some folks. And equity, is it to attract students from our district or from other districts? It's believed that some of this will take away the heart of what teachers have been doing. And I've heard repeatedly, as we just heard from a number of Peoria staff, about how strong of the community of staff, building leaders in particularly Peoria, Lindnall, and South have built, and the faith in those administrators and leadership teams the staff have at those sites. And the major concerns basically of blowing that up, tearing it down, breaking it apart when they believe they're on a really positive track forward. And then maybe I missed it, maybe I didn't hear it as I've heard it recently, that when these town halls started, staff members from administration to teachers to parent, I believe an entire staff, left those with the impression that their jobs as they know them would be gone, that perhaps they could reapply for their positions, that these buildings who have such strong faith in their administrative teams would possibly lose their administrative team. I heard a teacher say that I believe I've become obsolete. And I don't think a teacher ever becomes obsolete. So that is a huge concern for me. I see it as reconstituting these buildings, and that term to me indicates failure in a school. And I don't believe these are schools that I would deem as, or talk about as, failing. So those are top of my list of concerns. I'm not necessarily asking a question nor anticipating a response, but those are concerns I've received, and that my personal concerns as well.
Thank you, Director Reinhardt. Superintendent Munn, did you have anything that you wanted to add to Director Reinhardt's comments?
Well, if I may, I think there's a couple of things I would point out relevant to Director Reinhardt's comments and also to some of the public comment. At the beginning of this process and throughout the process, one of the commitments that the board made and held us to was that this process, as it related to repurposing schools, would not be about accountability. This was not about performance of individual schools. And it was not a value judgment about individual schools, that it was about the reality of the demographic shifts that we were dealing with and how do we best utilize the assets, the resources of the district to serve students. That, of course, is a double-edged sword because we have not tried to do a performance analysis or a value-based assessment as to which schools should be repurposed or which schools were doing what kind of work. And so in no way, shape, or form or any of the recommendations in front of you have anything to do with performance or accountability. Instead, they have always been about the criteria that we have laid out around the need and the location of buildings, which is why we identified potential buildings close to 2 years ago based upon building size, building age, building utilization, and a whole list of things that we identified. The double-edged sword of that, of course, is I believe every single one of our buildings in our schools can come in and tell you a very compelling story about who they are and the work that they're doing, because we're incredibly proud of that. But none of that addresses the underlying issues that brought us to the table and to resolve those things, which is what the board and therefore the administration has been committed to looking at. And I think that it's important to that connection of just to make sure we're all clear, since it was raised repeatedly in public comment, the closure of Peoria is not on your agenda tonight. The closure of Peoria has not been recommended to you. What has been recommended is on slide 4 of the recommendation presentation, which is in front of you. Now, at the same time, we've also laid out other components of blueprint that we would be doing and looking at. And so as it relates to Peoria, what we have said we're going to begin the work of is a 1.5 year long process of looking at changing, repurposing Peoria, ESC4, and part of Central into a magnet campus and that opportunity. And over the next 1.5 years, we fully expect lots of community engagement, lots of family engagement, and what that looks like and what that means. And we walk into it without a whole lot of presuppositions. There is absolutely no conversation around closing Central. That is not on the agenda. That is not proposed. That is not being discussed. It is about adding components to Central that would include a magnet specialization there within that comprehensive high school. So just to make sure that's clear, I know the board has all that information, but I just want to make sure that's all clear and out there. So as it relates to Wheeling and Peoria, again, the administration would be looking at a program change at those schools, which we would begin in launching essentially an 18-year planning and transition process. The only thing that's on the board agenda for the board to consider are those items on slide 4 of the recommendations.
Thank you, Superintendent Munn. I think it's easy to get confused by the two PowerPoints, the Town Hall PowerPoint and the recommendations PowerPoint. And I think that when people look at Blueprint Region 2, 3, Region 6, and slide 28 of the Town Hall presentation, they kind of get lumped in together and confused about exactly what we're looking at tonight. So thank you for that clarification. So tonight we are looking at the closure of Lynn Knoll Century at the end of the 2021 school year, 2020-2021. And then the closing of 6th Avenue and South Middle School at the end of 22-23, and the reallocation and use of bond funds, correct?
Correct.
Board, the floor is still open for discussion. I know that we received a number of emails from people from teachers, parents, even a student from Century and South. So board, please feel free to speak your thoughts. And if nobody has any thoughts that they'd like to share, then we can move on and I'll entertain a motion if we don't have any new information that we're seeking from the district. Director Gerken.
I just acknowledge the pain of these kinds of decisions. This is really, these are hard decisions, and I'm thrilled, honestly, to hear that people love their schools and love the staff that's there, and they hate to break that up. what I, and I do too, but what I keep in my mind is that Blueprint is first and foremost a long-range facilities plan, and that we are working hard to make sure that APS continues to be able to provide the kind of education that we want all our kids to have, and that long-range facilities and the community through Blueprint has been a part of looking at these possible decisions. Our community said we want choice, and we're looking at that in terms of magnet schools. We're trying to look at this whole big plan rather than just singling out individual schools. So going step by step. I appreciate the work of the Long Range Facilities Committee. I appreciate the work of others who have done excellent work, in my opinion, of putting together what makes the most sense. I don't always know that. And they're able to look at this huge, big picture to be able to see how we should best proceed for the benefit of all kids in APS. And so that's why I'll be voting in favor of this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gerken.
I'd like to throw in some concerns that have not been touched on, and we've heard a lot already. And therefore, tonight I'm not in favor of the recommendations. I've read through the material thoroughly. I don't fully understand why Lynn Knoll and Century would need to close and those students be transitioned twice before the new building is built. Like, I don't understand why the new building couldn't be built before the older schools were closed. And I know there's going to be some consolidation there. So that's one of my big concerns there, is transitioning students twice. The other is, you know, and this comes to the board, I would feel better identifying and knowing what our enrollment policy or what the enrollment plan will look like for these new schools, especially as we get further down the line and talk about magnet schools, what the enrollment plan for the students being affected in those areas, right? Like, I'm not okay with closing schools without knowing students will have a home in 2 years. You know, no one wants to feel like they don't have a landing spot, and I hate to have any families feel like that going into a closure. So I think that you know, it's possible for us to work hard and try to identify that plan ahead of time. I also don't, you know, I appreciate the efforts that have went into the Blueprint town halls with the staff and the broader community in terms of supporting our teachers and keeping them, you know, reassigning teachers and supporting them and retaining teachers. I feel like I haven't gotten a clear understanding of how we're doing that. So those are just 3 examples of where I just need a better explanation. I need clear understanding, and I think that information needs to be put out there just in black and white before I could put my faith into closing any schools at this point, and again, putting students and staff through some really difficult transitions during this pandemic. And I'm, you know, I don't mean to send mixed signals, as I've been a proponent and still am an overall proponent of Blueprint. I'm still super excited in this process, but I think we could do this in a very cognizant and considerate way. Again, with all that specific information being out there before we're forced to make these really hard decisions.
Thank you, Director Ortiz. Superintendent Munn, sorry to continue to call on you and probe you. However, I do think that Director Ortiz brought up some good questions, and perhaps you have answers that might help.
Sure, happy to. And I believe I identified 3 separate issues that Director Ortiz raised, and let me work backwards through those. One is the staff question. So staff employment rights are dictated by both state law and the master agreement. And that is what we are following. We have sent memos to all of staff and I believe to the board as well, laying out different provisions that govern that. And there's not much I can say other than we are required to and will follow all of the board policies, the master agreement, and state law in that process. Now, in addition to that, we will be doing some job fairs and some other things, some resume writing classes to try and support staff in that process. But fundamentally, I think we've been very clear that we recognize we have responsibilities under the law and your policy, and we will follow those. The second item you raised was about, I believe, where students would go upon closure of their schools. And that is a board boundary process. Just as you've gone through when you open a new school at Harmony, for example, where we then went out and went to the community and did a boundary process and then brought back to the board some proposals around that. If you authorize the closure of a school, that will then trigger the next process, which would be a boundary process to come back to you after some community feedback. We project, as I think we have in our FAQ, that we would be coming back to you at your March meeting with, here are the proposed boundaries or boundary choices for students who might have to transition schools based upon whatever decision you make tonight. So we have not jumped ahead of you in doing a boundary process before you've authorized, that transition. Your vote tonight would then authorize us to go to that next process. And then the last one, and the first issue you rose about why closing Lynn Knoll and Central. I believe you were just referring to Lynn Knoll and about why closing that while building the new school. Am I?
Transitioning students twice was the question.
So the question, the issue we have is we don't believe that it's viable to build a new Lynn Knoll with the existing Lynn Knoll still sitting there. It is a very complicated site from a land use situation, and in order to appropriately and safely and reasonably build a new Lynn Knoll, we believe we need to close down, demolish the existing Lynn Knoll in order to start the building process. The alternative would be a very costly process that would add probably another year or two to any consideration of this. And I don't believe that's either reasonable or economically viable for the district to do moving forward.
Director Ortiz, did that help to answer some of the questions, or do you have follow-up questions based on that information?
I mean, I still hear, and as it pertains to Lynn Knoll, I still hear, it's not viable to build with this other school here, and I hear the challenges and how that would be cumbersome, and even read in the FAQ, how it poses safety, and I get that, but I'm also, I can't ignore, the challenges and the trauma and sadness that's going to cause for our students. So, I'm trying to weigh out, the inconvenience of adults and how things are going to affect adults in the building of these, in the construction of these new buildings, and students filling. So, yeah, I heard everything you said. I still just feel a certain way, especially as it pertains to Lynn Knoll.
Yeah, I would argue that it's not about the inconvenience of adults, but it's about what's the appropriate use of the district resources. So in order to do a site assessment of Lynn Knoll to determine the feasibility of building in a different location, and maintain Lynn Knoll, The estimated cost is about $2.5 million. And we could, at the end of that $2.5 million, come back to you and say, it's not feasible. We still need to close down and tear down Lynn Knoll in order to make this happen. We know right now we can make this happen in that circumstance. So we believe it's the appropriate thing to do to make that recommendation to you. Because if we did that, it would also add another year to the timeline, right? And another year of the expenditures that we've been looking at, and a process that's been many years already in the development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, Director Mason asked a very similar question, Director Ortiz, and it's in the board submitted questions in the under the action item. The blueprint is number 1. So just wanted to throw that out there. I think others may have some thoughts or feelings that they would like to share. Director Mason?
Well, I think Marcus was before me, and then I'll go. I saw his hand go up before me.
Sorry.
But no, I appreciate it. I'll go after him, but I don't want to jump him.
Sorry,
to be fair.
Director Ivy, my apologies. Go ahead.
So I know there's some of those questions. I just had some. I probably got about 3, and then if I could, I just probably want to say something. But so I understand we don't know. At least it was indicated you don't know where the students from Lynn Knoll or Century would likely go. Do you have any ideas of possibilities? That's question 1. Question 2. Just reading through a lot of the emails that I've received from teachers and community members alike, I can't combine them all here into a question, but a big theme I hear is that the lack of detail. Now, and I understand why we don't have nearly as much detail, but I think there's a component of the public needs to understand that why we don't have as much detail for certain areas of the blueprint, and that would probably take me forever to figure out which areas, I suppose, but there's quite a few. And then the third thing is, I know you talked about, I know it's been discussed with respect to what would happen to our teachers and staff. You said you would comply with the law, of course, and you would also comply with the master agreement. But here's my question. Can you tell in a synopsis format, can you tell the folks what the master agreement summarizes as it relates to this and what the law says as it relates to this, so they're not in the position of having to go search for this information when hopefully maybe you can give them just a little synopsis of what these 2 areas say so that folks understand what that means. I understand what it means because I read it, but the community doesn't necessarily have the same access that we do. And so when you say comply with the law and the master agreement, I get it, but the community may not. So if you could just maybe give a quick synopsis of what that means. A huge concern for me, obviously, is just the displacement of teachers and staff. That's major, especially in these times. And so I think that's important that be said. So I'll just start with that and kind of go from there.
Certainly, Director Ivy, and thank you for the questions. Your first one was about where kids would go from both Century and Lynn Knoll. I can certainly look at the map and tell you what I think is the most likely outcome. But again, the board has a policy around how boundaries are drawn, the community engagement process, and then ultimately a vote. So I'm reluctant to just say, here's where they're going to go, because I don't have that authority, but I can look at a map and tell you what I think will happen. I think the most likely situation, given where kids live in relation to Lynn Knoll, is 70% of them would end up being drawn to a boundary that would include 6th Avenue, and another 20% going to Lansing, and then a smaller percentage may, just because of their on the periphery, may go to other places. For Century, the likelihood is that if you recall, Century has that awkward catchment map where there are bubbles all over kind of the southeastern part of the district. or southwestern part of the district around Century. And likely those kids would go to schools that are very close to the areas that they currently live. So for example, you've heard me make reference to, we have a large number of students who we bus to Century, even though they live across the street from Jewel. And I would expect that a new boundary process would likely draw them into Jewel, and then similar circumstances for several other schools in the area. So it is not that we are walking into this having no idea where these kids would go. We walk into it respecting the fact that there's a community process that we would engage next to talk to the community and then come back to you in March with recommendations. The second piece, you talked about a lack of detail. And I think this goes back to, you know, I'm reminded when we first launched this process, I had several conversations with the board where the board spoke to me about rumors they were hearing that this wasn't a real process and Rico just had a plan drawn up already and was going to be. And that would have been much easier. And if that were true, there would be a lot more detail here because we would have every single one of those details worked out. Instead, we committed to a open, transparent community process where we went step by step through phases. And you've seen 100 times at this point, we've shown you a slide that talked about different phases that we would work through in order to get answers together in an open, transparent community process. We are at a step where now, if you make certain decisions tonight, you will kick into the next phase where more detail around things like, for example, what a magnet design will look like, or a boundary process, or those other pieces. We believe it's true to our commitment to the community that we are not walking into this with every detail worked out and every detail done, but we have the details for the next step of the process. So if you approve recommendations to build buildings, then we will begin the process of, you know, hiring architects, hiring folks, hiring a staff to help design those buildings like we've done in other buildings. If you approve a process to close buildings, we would then launch into the next community engagement process, which would be for the boundary processes. And in companion with that, if we move forward with these other pieces, we would then kick into a process of engaging the community around the design of magnet schools. So all those pieces are part of what was the design at the outset. It was part of a commitment to having an open, transparent community process. The last piece, Director Ivy, I'm going to ask Mr. Smith to jump on. As the board knows, we have given in detail summaries to our staff around their employment rights in that process. I think it's fair and accurate to say we have not tried to explain that to the community because it really relates to our staff's employee rights, but we're happy. We know that the community may have those concerns, and I thank you for pointing that out. Mr. Smith?
Members of the board, good evening. Director Ivy, thank you for the question and the opportunity to speak to this issue. As Superintendent Munn indicated, when these recommendations were put forward to the Board of Education, the Division of Human Resources did prepare a memorandum which outlined what the both policy and statutory and collective bargaining agreement language that governs the reduction of staff as a result of school closures and or reconstitutions, provided a memo which outlined that information for each of our employee groups. Those memos were sent to the school leaders at each of the 4 schools that were involved, and then ultimately forward to all of the staff members at those respective schools. Subsequent to providing these sites with that memo, members of the Human Resources team held virtual meetings with the entirety of the staff at each of those schools where a presentation was provided, which broke down the collective bargaining agreement language, policy, as well as statutory language around staff reductions as a result of school closures, et cetera. At a very high level, because it is rather detailed and there are a number of nuances involved. Let me provide a summary. Speaking of teachers first, the state recognizes teachers in one of two ways, probationary versus non-probationary. A non-probationary teacher is an individual who has obtained employment rights within the school district, and as a result has the ability to, is able to maintain their employment from 1 year to the next. As part of that process, when we're looking at a school closure or staffing reductions at the school, by state law, the teacher must apply and compete for any open positions across the district for the following school year. In extreme cases, we have the ability to place a teacher into a position, but ultimately it falls on the teacher to, again, to apply and compete for a vacant position across the school district. If that teacher is not able to secure a position at another site, the school district then has the ability, again by state statute, to place a teacher in a short-term position, short-term being defined as 1 school year, into a, what the state calls a non-mutual consent position, meaning that that teacher did not apply and compete for that position. After that 1 year period of time, the teacher then could be placed on an unpaid leave of absence pending their ability to secure a mutual consent position moving forward. When it comes to our classified staff members, a very similar process is in place. However, it is not governed by the state statute. This is in APS policy. Very similarly, employees are categorized into probationary versus non-probationary. Non-probationary employees have employment rights moving forward. Once we learn that we will be looking at staff reductions as a result of a closure or other reasons, we then begin to work with those employees to assist them in securing a position for the following school year. Unlike teachers, we do have the ability to place our classified staff members into vacant positions across the school district. And for terminology purposes, we refer to those employees as overages, individuals who have lost their position as a result of the processes that we have just referred to. There are absolutely no guarantees that we'll be able to place everyone, but we certainly work our hardest to make those efforts. In the event we are not able to secure placement for everyone, I would then come back to the Board of Education and propose a potential reduction in force so that we are able to secure positions as best we can across the district. Again, lots of nuances and situations will vary based on individuals. I just want to present a high level summary of what those processes look like.
Thank you. So if I may, this is these decisions are difficult because it doesn't matter what blank we fill in with whatever school we have, we're going to be in the same position. I guess what I've realized through this whole process, quite frankly, is, we can't be guided by emotions at this stage. We have to obviously do what's best for our district at this point in time. And as I said, these are unprecedented times, quite frankly. I guess what I'm trying to think about in terms of making my decision, and this is for the board and this is for the community that's listening. We were told a story about land that was purchased some, I don't know, 70s, 80s or so. And I assume it probably wasn't a popular decision made by the board. But however, 7-8 years ago or so, that land was built upon because we owned it. This is where Vista Peak sits currently. And I guess at this point in time, that board had the forethought, I guess, to think for the future. And I think that's the hardest part for us as board of directors members, because we have to make decisions in the now, understanding that the effect is 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And so, yeah, I've heard options of why don't we change the boundaries, which would take from one school and give to another school. I've heard that, but then we still in the same situation of dealing with the other school. So I've really kind of struggled with this for a while, even though I went back and reviewed things. I mean, at this stage, I'm in a position where I'm going to support the recommendations at this point. And I know I've shared with some of the board members why, those who have asked. I think at this stage, we can't keep kicking the can down the road. And I understand that to us, $21 million doesn't seem like a lot, but it's significant, especially when we are looking at potential cuts, although we're probably in a better position than many of the other districts, just maybe sheer luck of when we were able to get that mill levy override. I don't know. But these are the tough decisions that we're gonna have to make in the future. So I'm supportive of the decisions that we have to make, understanding that they are unpopular. I guess I just try to look at it as we're trying to make decisions that's best for the district at this point in time. And although we can't physically see those decisions or the fruit of those decisions right now, we have to think 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years down the line, we can't think of for the now. And so I have read every email twice over and took a couple of phone calls and just really wanted to listen, not run my mouth, and just really listen and take notes of what was said. But I also understand through our training, our most recent training, that our view has to be higher and our view has to be farther down long range. And so that's the type of decision that I'm trying to make at this particular point in time. I guess I'm just trying to see what's going to be our next Vista peak that we can look back on in 10, 15 years and say, we had the forethought to get to that point. So that's where I'm at this stage. I understand we are lacking some detail, but I also understand that this is not something that we plan to implement next year. Everything just be done next year. I know this is going to take time. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. I struggled for a while with this, especially after reading the letters, but I also understand that we were not elected here to be popular folks. We were elected here to do what's right for our community and to have that mindset to think down the line. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to think long range. So I'm gonna just be quiet and listen.
Thank you, Director Ivy. No need to be quiet. Director Mason.
Well, as I listen and dissect all of this, taking all the emotion out and listening to the community and us wanting to look to the future, which we need to do. And, but at the same time, for me, in all of the decisions we've had, but some of the main things that have been said is that declining enrollment, budget, and buildings. How often in our conversation have I heard, because this would be the best for the outcome of our students? I haven't. That's concerning to me. As we talk about diversity and equity and changing and all the disruption and turmoil that our society is into right now, and even our district, where have all of this conversation said, we are doing this for the outcome of our students? We talk about boundaries, we talk about school closings, new schools opening. I'm concerned also about closing these schools. Schools are the foundation of a community. We're listening to our community. They want the best for their children too, just like we do. So we have to make sure in the decisions that we want to move forward, we'll do that for our community. And I'm afraid, what if we look up and we made all these changes, there's more division, there's more segregation. Did we do what we intended to do? I know we don't have a crystal ball, but at the same time, we need to really listen to the community and think about whatever we decide, and that's for me taking the emotion out of it, what would be best for our students? Will it bring them more inclusive with each other, learning about each other? Is that new building? Because no matter how gorgeous or new a building is, what's inside of the heart of that building? Is that academics? Is that instructional? Is that they're gonna have the best teachers in there? What is inside? And then we talk about transportation. We talk about magnet schools. Another thing is, how are we going to decide who's going to those schools? We talk about choice, but is it really a choice if there's a school that I can't get into and I'm on a waiting list? Did we give them a choice? Or you have to go across town and get on the bus 30 minutes to an hour away when the school could have been made better right there in your neighborhood, but now you gotta have, that's your choice? What if those schools that are put in these regional areas are not the schools you want to be in? So yeah, the details and the specifics are very important to me. And I know we can't have everything right now, but how are you gonna get to those schools? How is it gonna affect the neighborhoods? We talk about we're listening to the community, but are we really? If we're doing boundaries, who's gonna set up those boundaries? Superintendent mentioned community. I hope so, but is that a guarantee? But at the end of all of this, it has to be what's best for our stakeholders, which is our community and our students. Number one is outcomes for our students and what's going to be inside those buildings for our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Mason. Superintendent Munn, were you going to comment, or is it okay if I go to Director Cox? Okay. Vice President Cox.
Thank you. I feel, uncomfortable before we make big decisions like this. This is all above my pay grade. There's a lot of very highly educated people that are involved in a lot of the process in this. But when I think about the process, because one thing that I noticed that Superintendent Munn brings up is when we began this process, and we're talking about this process so much because this is a process. If you think about anything team related, military, athletics, executive, they put forth a process, and sometimes people are working on one portion of it and they're not as clear as they would like to be about what's going on another portion of it. But you have to trust the process, because the people that are putting this process together have the best interest in mind. And 3 years ago, when we started the blueprint process, we workshopped with tons of community groups, even though it wasn't as good as we would have liked it to be. We workshopped with so many people that were stakeholders about how we can put the students' outcomes first to make sure that they have the most opportunities. So one of my original issues was equity. One of many members of the board, we were worried about equity in this process. I don't want to take that to myself. But I had a good conversation with someone, as you said, Director Mason, who wants to put the kids first. I was actually talking to Brett Johnson, our Chief Financial Officer, and he was very positive about everything that was going on. And he said, this is what kind of sunk into my mind. He said, when we talk about equity, I love the opportunity to build a nice, big, shiny school with opportunities for more students, providing more options in the northwest side of Aurora, and in just the other side of Aurora that is more diverse, has more people of color, more migrant communities, more people experiencing poverty and whatnot, and let it perform just as well as other schools on the more affluent side of Aurora, where they're already experiencing so many opportunities. So I believe, even though we're just talking about buildings and not instruction, to Director Mason's point, we're building equity into this process as we go along, especially by initially starting this by getting new, better buildings that aren't draining our district from funding to schools on the more struggling side of town. I personally grew up next to a school that was a neighborhood school, and it was right down the street from my house, like 5 houses down. And that school was torn down, and the new school was built several miles away that was much bigger and much better. And we were safer, we were more comfortable, we had more space, tons more students came there, and I was exposed to tons more different types of people. I just remember that growing up, and I was not sad that they tore down my old elementary. That's anecdotal, but I believe it's possible for us to do this in a way, especially if we go step by step along this process, instead of trying to figure it all out right now. I believe it's possible for us to do this in a way that's considerate of everyone in that neighborhood, of whatever school needs to be replaced. And I don't think of it as just tearing down a school. I think part of it is building a new school for that neighborhood. And I consider that to be part of my responsibility, to provide new schools for neighborhoods in need of new schools. So I'm just thinking of all the counterpoints, because I'm taking everything that that Director Ortiz and Director Mason saying to heart. But when I think about it, we've been talking about this for 3 years in a way of putting students first, at least on this board. You know, we've been considering it in that way from Jump Street. So I'll just put it as that. I'm supportive of the blueprint process so far. I always get emotions and nervous before we have to vote on things like this, but I feel relatively comfortable moving forward.
Thank you, Vice President Cox. Obviously, you know, I think it's hard to say that we take emotion out of it. I mean, we live in this community. Obviously, we're dedicating our time to be on the school board, and obviously we care, and our decisions are important, and they do have impacts. I think, you know, Director Mason brought up a good point, and that was focusing on student outcomes. And I think Vice President Cox, you answered exactly what I was going to say, that I agree that enrollment and budget may not be tied necessarily to student outcome, but at the end of the day, you know, as we've talked about over the last almost 4 years, students on the east side of Aurora are getting these big, beautiful new buildings, while a lot of the community has said that they felt forgotten about on the west side of the community. And so I think that as we have these conversations, you know, it's going to be tough, and we're going to have really difficult choices to make that all have impacts, hopefully, you know, for the betterment of the future for students. You know, they're tough decisions at the end of the day, but I think, as Vice President Cox and Director Ivy said, we've been talking about these decisions for a long time, and we've talked about equity and ensuring that there is equitable resources across the district, not just to focus on certain sides of the district. And as we're not talking about building those new shiny buildings right now, we're talking about closure. It's hard to think about what the future might look like when it's not directly in front of us. With that being said, Superintendent Munn, I did want you to, if you're okay with it, comment a little bit about Director Mason's and perhaps Director Ortiz, maybe Director Reinhardt's thoughts, because they weren't involved as long as we have been, Director Gerken, Director Cox, Director Ivy, and myself, and just some of the questions that they had about how this ties into student outcome and how just the bigger picture of it. And also, I know that we talked about the committees for the changing of the boundaries and stakeholder input in that. What would that look like? What would the board's involvement be in that? Would there be board involvement? Could there be? So perhaps some of those questions would be really helpful to be answered.
Certainly, Madam President. You know, I think back to one of the steps we did in phase 1 of this, where we had 2 task forces that were comprised of both community members and staff members and others. And there was a task force that we internally euphemistically referred to as the Dreamers. That the job of that task force was to just think about what kinds of things could we do that would really dramatically positively impact kids. And we asked that task force to really just think and to dream about some of those things, and to really put that out there on behalf of our staff and our community to really think about that. And then we paired that with a second task force where we said, you have the less fun task of being the practical people, right? Of saying, taking a look at those dreams and saying, how do you make those reality? How do you put those in a concrete way? And that was part of the work that led to that, 200-page phase 1 report. Us thinking about it, if you go back to that report again, it reflects deeply upon what does this community need? What do our kids need? What does the research tell us around getting best outcomes for kids? What are the structures? And then that led to, in part, the work where you put together that framework and talked about different ways that we could think about how our physical assets could complement the work that we needed to do to support our kids. So I think very much embedded in this plan is how does this improve outcomes for kids? And then, roughly 2 years ago, we came to you with the financial analysis and said, here is the cost of doing this versus not doing this. And if you don't do this, here's the financial cost, which we could bear, but what that means are fewer direct services to kids, fewer wraparound services, and but we can maintain smaller buildings, but that's the trade-off at the end of the day around those dollars. And you said, and I applaud you for saying so, no, we recognize that our kids need those services. We need to focus those resources on our kids, which means we need to do a better job of using our assets to conserve and use our resources for programs and services to kids. And again, that's been a driving force of this work, of the responsible use of our assets. And so that's led to all of this work and all of the decisions that you have made. Now, on the back end, as you're asking about the boundary process, again, we've done this step by step all along the way, where we talked about those 3 tranches of decisions. We always talked about how certain decisions would follow one after the other, and we our recommendation is to move to that next tranche of decisions. And we always laid out one of the things that would be is a boundary process. And you have articulated already in your policies the boundary process, and I don't have the citation to it, but you require both in your current policies and in the limitations that you're going to talk about tonight, that we engage with the community around major decisions, which boundary change certainly would be. Ultimately, it will come back to you, presumably in March, with recommendations from that community engagement, that community feedback, very similar to what you did around Harmony. And you, if you recall that process, you recall it's very robust. You recall a lot of community members were coming in, telling you the different maps that they liked versus the ones they didn't like. You pushed it back to them and talked about different things. It was a very robust community process. This one will follow the same framework. We'll make it shorter because of the timing that we have to do, but we'll follow the same framework. But ultimately, the board is the one who decides what the boundaries will be. I don't have that authority, but we'll bring to you community feedback around that. And we'll, of course, notify the board when those opportunities are, and if the board wants to engage in that. Just like any other community process, the board is free to show up and listen to the community, engage with them. But that's the process we'll follow, is the one that you've already articulated.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Munn. With that being said, we are now down to a decision, and I am going to rely upon my colleagues to help guide me as to our next steps. So tonight, we can vote on the recommendations that we've discussed. And again, those recommendations are on slide 4 of the PowerPoint, the blueprint APS implementation recommendations, new building and repurposing recommendations for regions 2, 3, and 6. So if we are ready to vote, we can do that. I'll entertain a motion, or a member can move to postpone or to table pending more information. And that would need to be specific to the district as to what information you would like or what information you'd need in order to make your vote. So I'll stop talking and open the floor to my colleagues. I believe looks like Director Gerken may be ready, but others, please feel free.
You ready to hear my motion?
I'm ready.
Okay. I do move that we accept the recommendations that have been presented to us, those regarding the reallocation and use of bond funds, as well as the closure of schools.
Thank you, Director Gerken. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been moved and seconded by Director Cox and Director Gerken. Is there any discussion? Radio silence. Okay, hearing none. We are prepared to tally our votes. Claudia, can you please help us out?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Armstrong Romero.
Aye.
Director Cox.
Aye.
Director Gergen.
Aye.
Director Ivy.
Aye.
Director Mason.
Nay.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat?
Nay.
Thank you.
No.
Director Ortiz.
Aye.
Director Reinhardt.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So tonight that motion is carried, and that will conclude the action item for Blueprint APS. Superintendent Munn, please keep us posted as to the next steps, particularly with the boundary committee. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And thank you, Mr. Smith, for being available. All right, the next item is the COVID-19 update. Superintendent Munn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. That's a bit of a hard turn. We've worked for many years to get to tonight, and if I can take a moment of privilege to thank all of the many, literally thousands of people, community members, staff, others who have worked to get to this point to launch us into the next process. We do not take this lightly, the transition that we are working towards with the district, but we also recognize that this is what we believe is best for kids, and what the community we believe is articulated are the components of what's best for the kids of this community. So we appreciate your leadership and your guidance in that. With that, let me turn to our COVID update. Today is an exciting day. We had kids in all of our buildings for the first time since March 12th of 2020. And I can't tell you the level of excitement that I have over that fact, that reality. It's tremendous. We know that there is a lot of uncertainty and some level of anxiety amongst staff and students and community around the global pandemic, around social unrest, around our inauguration tomorrow, all those things all happening at the same time. But we had kids in buildings learning today with their peers and with teachers, and I celebrate that. We, as a community, are seeing positive trends in our COVID numbers, and I speak to both the Arapahoe and Adams community and APS proper around that. We anticipated a spike, a double spike after Christmas and then New Year's. We did see a spike in numbers after Christmas, around kind of the January 7th to 10th timeframe. We did see a spike in incident rates going up into kind of the low 600s. And that then quickly dissipated. We expected a second spike to happen really over the weekend, this last weekend, following New Year's. It does not appear so far that that spike is actually happening. Actually, today marks the first time in quite some time that I recall that the numbers in Adams County were lower than the numbers in Arapahoe County, both in the low 500s this morning. That obviously adjusts itself over the day and changes, but that's tremendous to see that those numbers have been falling into ranges that are obviously more comfortable for our work and for the community. We have roughly 13,500 families who have opted to be fully remote this school year. That number changed slightly over the Christmas holiday, but that's kind of the rough number, which means that when you factor in the number of students who are in cohort A and cohort B, we probably have anywhere from 11 to 12,000 kids in any given week who are in school in the different cohorts. You break that down across our buildings, those are fairly small sizes that we are seeing, and we'll get harder numbers over the next couple of days as we actually have kids in buildings and do attendance and all those things, but those are roughly the numbers that we're seeing. We have staff who again came back into the building last week for purposes of doing remote instruction, but also learning again some of the protocols again for our high school staff. Some of them, it's been quite some time where they've been in the building with kids, but for other staff to refresh and look at new protocols as we are looking at new information from Tri-County Health and the CDC and others around how we implement safe spaces. The last piece I guess I'll touch on are vaccinations. I know that's obviously an important topic and a hot topic for everyone. One thing I think I want to say publicly, because based upon the emails that I've received, I think there's a level of confusion. I just need to make it as clear as I can. APS has absolutely no control over priority of vaccines. That is a process that is determined by the state, the Department of Public Health and Environment, informed by the governor's office. The work that we've tried to undertake over the last, since New Year's Eve essentially, is to identify healthcare partners that we can solve the logistics problems that they have. When the state changed the priority order, we quickly realized in working with our public health partners that there was a logistical issue related to identifying, particularly in the education sector, who qualified, right? Who were people who could qualify for a test or for a vaccine, how would they get signed up? And so we worked quickly to try and solve those logistical issues so that when the priority order comes up and when vaccine is available, again, things beyond our control, the healthcare providers can quickly access our staff and make those vaccinations happen as quickly as possible. And so we've formed partnerships with, at this point, at least 4 healthcare providers, working to have conversations with another 2 so that we have multiple opportunities for our staff so that when that is available, when that is a reality, that our staff can quickly access that. That said, what the governor has said repeatedly, what public health has said, what I've said is that the access to vaccines should not impact a decision around reopening schools, because our reality is that that tail is going to take a while. And we also know that there is at this time no juvenile vaccine, right? The current vaccines are only approved down to age 16. And so it will be another long period of time, it seems, before kids have that opportunity for vaccination. And there's some level of uncertainty as to when that will be. And also what is the effective period for a vaccine as well. And so we can't pin our hopes on if we can just wait until that time period, because it's still an unknown and uncertain. And so we have to deal with the other public health threat right now that has emerged, which is an extended time in remote learning. The last piece I will point out is I think we've mentioned to you that we were doing a student survey. That student survey closed on Friday. So I don't, as of yet, have the data from that, but as soon as we get the data and can crunch that, we will turn that back out to you in the community to give you a sense of how our students are faring, how they're feeling about their experience this year around our 4 essential expectations, which were academics, behavioral supports, behavioral and social supports, our business operations, and then our physical structural environments. And that concludes my update for this evening, Madam President.
Superintendent Munn, I do have a question, as I'm sure you've received several emails on the PPE wearing. I'm just curious, and I know that at the state we have to wear an N95 and a shield and or goggles as well, and that's mandated. Is that mandated by the state that teachers have to wear an N95 mask and a shield and or goggles?
No. So if you recall, the health guidance that we have been kind of using as our touchstone comes from the Metro Denver Health Partnership, and the latest update came to you kind of mid-December. And one of the first sections of guidance there recommends the use of shields and N95 face masks, but the guidance makes it clear that that is appropriate in circumstances where other mitigation measures are not available to you. So it's kind of an enhanced level of PPE. So we have very clearly heard from the board that your direction is that we should have a conservative approach in how we do all these steps, how we do all these processes. And so in that conservative approach, what we have said to our staff is we have multiple layers of mitigation in place, everything from our enhanced cleaning processes to our cohorts, to all those are different layers of mitigation. However, when it comes to your personal protective equipment, we laid out a kind of a three-step rubric and said that if you are not able, because of the circumstances of your work, to check, or if you, 2 of those 3 boxes, then you should utilize enhanced PPE. And so we then sent that to our COVID teams, which are school-based teams, and said, you're all in different circumstances, different buildings. We need you to evaluate with your staff who makes sense to utilize that enhanced PPE. We got some feedback, as you know, around that, around people's concerns. And so we clarified that certainly that there can be exceptions or exclusions to that. But again, because it's such a site-based discussion, we believe, we gave the authority to make those exceptions to the school-based COVID teams and the site leaders based upon what's happening in that certain environment. Because again, it's about that mix of mitigation, that mix of measures. And we are providing all of the N95s and all of the face shields to staff who are required to use them. But we believe that once you go through that analysis, it is it's certainly not all of our staff. We believe that there are certain job categories and certain physical layouts that may require it, but not the majority of our staff.
Thank you. Board, are there any questions about the COVID-19 update from Superintendent Munn?
I have one, President Armstrong-Romero, about the face shields and N95s. I know that the N95s have been made available. And I believe Superintendent Munn, you just said the district also has the face shields. Are those being distributed as it's deemed necessary per staff member? Are they already available to staff members?
Mr. Seglem has popped on because I believe he has the answer for you.
In fact, thank you, Superintendent Munn. Director Reinhardt, in fact, we started distribution of the face shields today based on the input from each of the schools as to their needs. We are also purchasing an additional reserve of those face shields so that we will have additional ones on hand in the warehouse for any additional teachers that or other staff members that require the face shields. But that distribution started today.
Thank you. And if a staff member would find it more appropriate for himself, herself to wear a goggle, some form of eyewear over the face shield? Do they provide their own? And I understand there would have to be an approval of what type of equipment that would be.
Right. At this point, based on input from staff and teachers, the most comfortable is the face shield, which goes around the head and then drops in front, as opposed to goggles, and that's what we're providing. If we have not had, to my knowledge, any teachers come forward and say that they want goggles. And so we were providing the face shields. We can revisit that if in fact we get a significant number of staff or teachers that would prefer the goggles.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Director Gerken.
Superintendent Munn, I was just wondering where you are pulling the data from and what time frame you are using now. Are you using the school district boundary data that Tri-County put together for us? Are you doing a 60-40 Arapahoe Adams? How are you looking at the data as you think through what the incident rate is, for instance?
Yeah, I look at all of it, just to be frank. The data I was reporting to you, so for example, today, the Adams and Arapahoe numbers, that comes from just the state health and Tri-County numbers on the state variances that you can see on their numbers. I believe it's 501 and 505 respectively for Adams and Arapahoe as of today, which is a drop. Yesterday they were both at 513, which was kind of a unique shift. I also then look at our district numbers, and I look at both analyses that we had talked about previously, the most up-to-date numbers, but then also that backdated number based upon the most complete testing goes back a week, really just to look at those trends.
I guess maybe I'm pulling wrong dates because when I pulled them on Tri-County today, I got an incident rate that was higher than 500. I'll put it that way. I don't remember what it was exactly, but.
No, it's certainly higher than 500. So right now, as I pull up Tri-County, the incident rate for Adams is 505 and for Arapahoe 508. I lost you on my screen there. And then if I click over to the school district number and look at our 14-day rate using today as a run, give me 1 second to tell you what the most up-to-date numbers are.
So 14 days back from today, or a week ago, 14 days back past that?
I will look at both. Again, just for purposes of understanding trends.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So on a regular basis. So our incident rate, if using today, 14-day is 575. And then taking that back a week, let's see. This is like doing math in public to a degree here. But. That number is, sorry, it's not cooperating with me. $606.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I have a question as it relates to potential learning loss and what, plans and measures we're putting into place now that we have students back in the classroom. I imagine this topic will be coming up a lot more often, especially as we get closer to the end of the school year. But wanted to, hear any initial thoughts and plans about, again, the potential learning loss that has already taken place with students having been remote for half of the school year now.
Yeah, thank you, Director Ortiz. I think in response to one of the board questions, we made reference to, having to look at more extraordinary measures going forward to address learning loss. So I certainly think that the learning loss that nationally we're experiencing, and then in APS because of COVID, is a multi-year challenge for us going forward. I don't believe that it will just be magically made up over the next year or so. I think it's going to be with us for some time to come. The first step for us is assessment. What we're doing with iReady and trying to track that. We completed the first iReady run back at the beginning of the school year, and we brought you some updates around that data. The second iReady window was completed, and Andre will have to shoot me the dates, I don't recall, and then we'll have a third iReady window coming up in April, where we should be able to have some sense of quantification of learning loss. So it won't be exact, but we'll have a sense of kind of the challenge in front of us. We are now in the process of planning what the framework or structure might be for how we attack learning loss. As you know, we are likely to get some dollars out of the federal government. Those are one-time dollars, so we have to be very strategic in thinking about how we jumpstart some of that work. A top priority for us will be addressing the needs of our special needs students and providing compensatory services for the many of our students who may not have fully gotten their IEP services. And I expect that we will be looking towards sometime in the summer to do that, and probably also for some of our students who may have experienced larger impacts of learning loss, perhaps sometime over the summer. We'll have to work and see, one, if we are able to find the appropriate staffing for that time period. We recognize that our staff is, will need and deserve a break, but we will have to think about how we can staff that process. And then we'll have to look at other structures, everything, and the common ones talked about across the country that we're looking at, that everybody's looking at, of do we create a balanced calendar where we're extending the school year beyond next school year? Do we look at extending the school day in certain circumstances? Do we dramatically expand some of our tutoring and intervention services, either through online platforms or through engaging other human capital, other people coming in and doing those things? All those things are on the table. All those things have to be on the table. We have to find the right mix of those things and then start bringing them to you as part of the budget for how we will start to address learning loss.
Thank you. One idea that I've heard is even thrown out there to consider is like a makeup year, right? A voluntarily makeup year from the families. Is this an option that's being considered at all here?
Those mechanisms already exist if families want to ask for or petition that process. I don't know that we'll be creating a special portal for it or anything along those lines. I know we're having those conversations, but it's not something that we would have to create. It already exists as a way and a structure in our policies and in state law. We would clearly have to think about how we advise families about the impact of that on the back end, and the board would have to think about the impact of that on the back end if you create certain bubbles in certain places, or if you could see a situation where you have certain students who are even aging out at a certain time, and So it creates, there's a superstructure around that we would want to be just very thoughtful around if that's what families and students need. But we really are going to be in the space of just trying to think about really what do family and students need to address this time period.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent Munn. We are now on to board work, and we are on to the results and limitations discussion. We have all of the community responses. Thank you so much to Claudia. There was a tremendous amount of work that went into gathering and compiling all of that feedback, so thank you. All right, board. Superintendent Munn did pose a question, and just something that we probably need to think about is that the state assessment data. Superintendent Munn, did you want to pose that question to the board? It was about the state assessments and whether or not we'll be able to accurately gather that data and use that as an effective measure.
Yeah, certainly, Madam President. If I may, there was another question that I posed. If I could ask that one first,
please.
Just to keep it straight in my head. As the board is looking at its results and limitations, we just had a significant but a technical question. When you look at those results, do you intend to look at the district as a whole, or do you intend to only look at APS traditional schools? In other words, should charter schools be part of the analysis for things like state assessments and your evaluation, or not? Because obviously then that creates different numbers and just a different set of data. And there's different philosophical approaches to that, but we just needed some clarity around that.
Yeah, I definitely remember that question, and talking through it with our coach, AJ. One of the questions that he posed to me when I asked him that question was, does the board hold the superintendent accountable to charter school performance? And that was a no, that we don't hold the superintendent accountable based on charter school performance. I mean, there's definitely been times where there have been charter schools that Superintendent Munn has posed to the board to close. The board may have voted in favor, and then of course the state board may have reversed the decision. So those are things that we need to keep in mind as well. But the floor is open. Thoughts from others?
Madam Chair.
Please.
I also consider that they wouldn't be going along with whatever plan the district moves forward with, when it comes to academic performance and whatnot, because they're not under our purview in that way to take direction. So their numbers would pretty much do what their numbers are going to do no matter what, and that could hinder our measure of our own progress, not our own progress, but the progress of the traditional schools as they're going down the road.
Right. Great point. So I'm seeing kind of some nods of agreement. Superintendent Munn, I'm going to take that as we are holding you accountable to the traditional schools.
Thank you. We appreciate that clarity. I think the other issue that you were alluding to was the question that I raised. And I'm not even sure that was so much a question, just to make sure the board was very clear and advised on the reality that as currently written, your goals, your / results, sorry, I don't recall which language you settled on. Results, okay. Are heavily steeped in state assessments, CMAS data, which we do not have at present. I think it's looking more and more likely we will not have this coming year, which will then also impact the following year. It'll probably be, whenever you take a pause on those things, I think it takes about another 2 years before you have data that you can really compare and look at and understand. And so just making sure the board was clear that you were going to have some real challenges in how you looked at and evaluated that. And it really is going to take a very, some sophisticated time with all of us to interpret whatever data we have as it relates to what you're trying to do with those results.
Thank you, Superintendent Munn. That's a good point. And Director Gherkin, I think we're probably thinking the same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I know this isn't our choice, but let's say the legislature decides that we don't need to do CMAS and other state assessments right now. Or even if they made it an option, let's say they made it an option, I would advocate for not doing it and instead just keep on teaching and use our own in-house assessments, iReady and whatever else that would make the most sense to use, so that teachers have formative data to move ahead and that we don't lose more instructional time through testing. So I don't know if we should consider rewriting our results because we know we're not going to have CMAS, or if we should just leave the result as it's a draft, so we can make whatever changes. I'm just not sure whether we should go ahead and change it and do that right now, or just adjust as we go along. But that was definitely things I thought about.
Yeah, I agree with that. Others? Director Breinhardt?
I'm wondering, I don't know what other instruments are available. I know iReady. Are there other instruments available? I'm sure there are. I don't know all of what's currently being used in our schools. Is there any answer, any thoughts that can be shared on that?
I mean, there's certainly any number of other instruments out there, and we've used them over the years. What I don't think the board is looking to do is to add another layer of testing in the district in order to utilize those instruments. So that's the challenge, right? My understanding is that you relied upon CMAS not so much because you were fans of CMAS as much as that's the data we have and it's consistent. And at this point, we've tried to trim back as far back as we can to that which is required. That, of course, if it's not there, then begs the question, how do you interpret that?
That's a good point. AJ, our facilitator, posed 3 thoughts on this. And basically, he said that the first thought was that every district kind of struggles with the decision of whether or not to use state assessment data in the assessment of student performance / superintendent performance. Some options that he posed that we could look at is looking at we can create or require district directed summative assessment. There are pros and cons to that. And also looking at data collected by the district rather than the summary assessment data collected by the state. So there are some options. And I know that in one of our town halls, I believe it was Director Gherkin and we had a town hall with AEA, and we heard quite a bit of feedback as to thoughts on using state assessment data. And many people are not fans of that, at least from that town hall that we hosted together. And there were some proposals for alternative data measures. So I think it's something that we need to continue to look at and perhaps decide where we fall. We can also ask around other districts. I know that Director Ivy is on Cube and has a lot of connections there. And I think that asking some of those board members what data they're using to evaluate superintendent and student performance would be critical. I think it would be super effective to have that feedback. Director Ivy, if you're willing to gather that.
I'll do that.
Great. Any other thoughts?
I just don't want to add anything new right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think all of us agree with that.
Yeah. I agree with Debbie.
Thinking about what the most, and I don't know iReady that well, so thinking about what the most valuable pieces of that instrument is, for instance, and would you lift that up right now as opposed to the whole battery? I don't know. Maybe there's a way to look at things based on the kind of needs that we have right now. I mean, what do we get from CMAS? How can we put that into iReady or any other instrument that we're using right now?
I think it's really difficult to think and talk about student outcomes right now in this context, because I know, even from personal experience, family members that are doing remote learning and really struggling with it, and it not being a clear indicator of their overall performance as a student. So I think as we talk about student outcomes, right now it's going to be pretty tricky because it might look drastically different 2 months from now or next year. Superintendent Munn?
Well, I certainly echo what you're saying, Madam President. Let me be very clear. I do not want to, I'm not trying to recommend that you move away from accountability around student outcomes, or that we move off of even the structure that you've worked on the last several months. What I think you just need to be cognizant of is that we do not have and will not have the data to fill in the blanks for those high level results. So I think that then means the progress monitoring structures become even more important. And then it also becomes, just quite frankly, much more difficult on you to understand and interpret that data as to whether or not it's moving in a direction that you believe is the right direction, an important direction. And if you want to keep that framework, that's where I think you end up, is relying heavily on that progress monitoring, and until that other data kind of catches up to it and matches with the understanding, it may be a year or two before that happens. The alternative, it seems to me, is to back off of that structure to a certain degree, and look for a body of evidence that meets the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve, and to have us kind of identify that body of evidence. The downside there is I do think that takes you further away from the structure you've been trying to get into. But I don't have a great answer for you just in this moment in time as to how we kind of thread this needle.
Sure. I wonder, and this might be out there, and if I'm going too far left, just tell me. Would Chief Academic Officer Wright be willing perhaps to, I trust in his thoughtfulness and his processes around evaluating student performance, would he be able to perhaps propose a measure that would best capture performance right now? I don't know, maybe it's just a thought, like if he has some ideas about how the board can best evaluate.
Yeah, and certainly happy to have Andre come on. I suspect right now what we're going to say is similar to what I'm saying, is we have iReady, And we have, we have some data, right? We have access, which we're in the process of now. We have graduation rates, which provide us some level of information at a high level, which speak to a couple of the points in your results. But if you're talking about a second set of data to replace the high level results,
perhaps interim data, and maybe not to replace, but like an interim.
right.
I don't know.
I think that ends up being the iReady progress monitoring. But let me, Andre, is there something I'm missing as far as another data set that we might have?
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity, Rico, just to go back and revisit what the actual expectations are as the board has set parameters around specific targets. And so I think once we go back and take a look at what those targets are, we have measures that we can actually go to that the board can evaluate. But keep in mind, this is a baseline year. And that I wish there's other way to say it, but it's not. This is a baseline year with unprecedented circumstances. So you will be beginning from a place that has an asterisk beside it, as far as I'm concerned, right? Because it has not been a normal, but we still have interim data that we can provide. We have PSAT, SAT assessments that we've already created that give us some semblance of where how kids are going to perform when they actually take the test. When we have those that we can match back to what you're looking for. But as I said before, this will be baseline data. Mm-hmm. And if the measures in a year from now are inconsistent with what we're using this year, there's another decision that you have to make. I've said this to you all before. What data do you trust? That's always been my question, right? And so if we're going to lean into Illuminate as an interim or an iReady as a diagnostic, and you trust that data, then give me more than 1 year so that you have something to compare it to, and not shift completely where then it's not impactful. So for us, we have measures that we can help set your baseline. But you've got to trust that data and then build from there. Because if you don't stay consistent, then it sends a different message. I don't know how you can evaluate it.
Thank you. Thank you for chiming in. Sorry to kind of just throw your name out there. Appreciate you. That was very, very helpful.
Sure. We just had to get him out of the makeup chair and into a camera. So.
His lighting still looks great. Other thoughts, board? So if you could, board, please look at the feedback from that was compiled and share your thoughts or think about other data sets, and Director Ivy will get back with us about what some other districts are using. I'll also check in with AJ and see if he can share some other ideas and thoughts as well. And also think about what CAO Wright just said about baseline data. I know that 4 seats will be coming vacant in November, if you will, and there will be an election. And so that may, what the board chooses has ramifications. So just thoughts on that. I don't know, people's intentions to run again, but just thinking about the future and longevity of creating baseline goals and baseline data as our results to evaluate performance. And Superintendent Munn is critical. So really, Director Mason, Director Reinhardt, Director Ortiz, your feedback is going to be very critical because you will be championing this for the long haul. if you will. Okay. So we will put this on the agenda again for next meeting and have more of a discussion, if that's okay. Seeing nods, okay. So open dialogue. I do have one item that I'd like to request or share. I know that we've talked about our in-person meetings, and my request is that we shift and move back to in-person. And for those who are concerned about being in person, definitely accommodating with the hybrid model still, in being respectful of those who may be high risk and don't want to be in that environment, but understanding that the district definitely takes safety into consideration and that there are safety measures to keep us all socially distanced and safe. Just wanted to throw that out there if you guys would be willing to move back to in-person / hybrid for those who are unable to join us in person.
I believe it would be appropriate for us to return to in-person meetings.
Yeah, I agree. I welcome the suggestion and was going to bring it up if nobody else did. So, and you know, think it's the right thing to do in terms of accommodating anybody who to have that hybrid experience, just long term as well. You know, it's any given week really that we need to just exercise caution and do what's right for our families. So
I agree too, going back. Very much so.
I say let's go for it. You know, if it's, I believe that the district put into place lots of ways to keep us safe while we were meeting in person. And if, you know, as long as I feel safe, I'll be there. And if not, I'll be here. So
I echo Debbie.
Superintendent Munn, were you
Director
going to say
Ivy, sorry.
Oh, y'all know my position. I was always of the position that we, if the students are in school, we're in session in person. So
Okay.
that hasn't changed for me.
Thank you. Superintendent Munn, with that being said, would it be feasible for the team to support our return to in-person for our next board meeting, which is February 16th?
Certainly, Madam President, I'm under the assumption that you were talking about essentially the same protocols that we had in place whenever that was prior to Thanksgiving. We would, of course, welcome any feedback or thoughts around changes or enhancements to those protocols. But with that general assumption, we'd be in a position to do that, certainly.
Thank you, Superintendent Munn. I think the one request that I'd have, and perhaps I don't know if the rest of the board will be on board with this, but I do think that the N95 masks and face shield or goggles is appropriate, but ultimately it's up to the board about PPE and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we can certainly make those available. I don't think I can require you to, but we can certainly make those available to you.
Okay. I guess as long as they're available, obviously masks are required, and I don't think we should go as far as to mandate each other on what we choose to wear or not. I do have faith that you all will keep us safe, Rico, as you did before, and very well taken care of. So with that being said, our next board meeting will be in person. February 16th. So, any other items for open dialogue? I know that, just one last thing on my end, I know that our meeting structure has been, a lot of people have questioned the change in structure. And I think that our meetings should obviously start turning toward more of the student outcome and really narrowing the focus of our meetings. We've heard quite a bit from the community that that opportunity for audience is not engaging, and there's some frustration there. And I think that the shift in our board meetings, people feel like they can only come to the board meetings to engage with us. And I think that's the shift that we're trying to move away from, that we need to have more community engagement sessions. I know that there was some confusion with staff engagement versus community engagement. And so taking that lens of the district with staff engagement and staff leadership. And I know that Rico and team have scheduled quite a few engagement sessions on their end with staff, which is great. And I know that a couple of us have had the opportunity to listen in to a couple of those. So I'm really thankful and appreciative, and I'm assuming that will continue. And from the community's perspective, on the community end, we need to shift and really ensure that we are hosting town halls and having those opportunities available to hear from our community and engage them. And it shouldn't just be in the board meeting. So that's all I'll say on that.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Kyla. So, and just for clarification for me, with having, let's say we want to have a town hall meeting, and we're able to set that up, invite all the board, because we're going to make that a public meeting so the board can be involved in it and not just two of us in it. And we're able to have that set up through Claudia.
So 2 hosting, the rest of the board listening, if that. So it's not the whole board is engaging, it's 2 people, 2 board members hosting. And yeah.
That's in the town hall. In the town hall, it has to be 2 hosting and the rest of the board listening.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And Claudia can definitely work to set that up. Right, Claudia? I hate to speak for you, I'm sorry.
She's on here, yeah.
Yes, ma'am, I'm happy to help.
So if there are opportunities, that was a great point, Director Mason, that if there are opportunities to join one another, or if you have something coming up and you don't, of course, with our very strict Brandon policies, I just think about Brandon and legal, reach out to Claudia if you'd like a partner, if you schedule a meeting. And I know that several of us would be happy to jump on board and partner with each other. So
thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts for open dialogue? Okay. Hearing none, we are on to the policy perception checklist. And did the board receive information tonight that requires a policy change? Perhaps with the boundary discussion. It's something that we will need to further look at in our policies, especially as we look to shift our policies. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. And any additional information or monitoring, obviously Blueprint is something that we will continue to monitor. And Superintendent Munn's COVID-19 updates are also something that we'll continue to stick close to and continue to monitor very closely. Any other thoughts on policy perception checklist? As a reminder, our next meeting, AJ, our facilitator, will be joining us to go over our board self-monitoring. So be prepared. All right, other than that, our next meeting again will be held live. There will be accommodations made for those who would like to come watch live, of course, to a specific capacity. Not sure what that is, but I'm sure the district will provide us with that information. There's also the opportunity to continue watching us live at boe.aurorak12.org/live. If there is nothing else, we will be adjourned at 8:30 p.m. We are adjourned. Have a great evening.
Everyone take care.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.